if you're contemplating a divorce, it's really important to understand all the things that go into a divorce, the common myths, the common mistakes, and get an idea of what it looks like before you make that decision. And of course, if you're sitting the fence and you're thinking that your relationship may have the opportunity to salvage it, then by all means, you should certainly give that a try. What we like to do here is just help reveal some of the things that you need to be thinking about if you are in fact contemplating divorce. My name is Elizabeth Rose, and I'm a certified divorce lender, and I help divorcing clients as they go through the process on both sides of the fence, identify real property challenges, understand where their real property intersects with the tax laws and with the legal matters, so that both parties can have a successful outcome to the financial details of their divorce. And I'm joined with my co-host, Allison Jeffries. Hello, Allison.
Hi, Elizabeth. So I'm Allison. I'm the author of the Amazon bestselling book, A Woman's Guide to Surviving Divorce. And I'm a divorce coach. And what I prefer to call myself is a life recreation coach for women. And what I do is I help women that are living in the shadow of divorce. Divorce may be a thought, it may be a reality, or it may be something you've already been through and you're trying to heal from. And I help women navigate the emotional, legal, and financial challenges that come with divorce to recreate their lives and learn to live on their own terms and have that brighter future that they've always dreamed of.
And after all, isn't that really what we're all after, that brighter future? And I love the idea of recreating ourselves. And I think even if we're not divorced, whether we've never been married before or we're still in our storybook, amazing, wonderful marriage, or if we're divorced, no matter who we are or where we go through seasons of life where we find ourselves needing to recreate ourselves. So I love what you do and what you bring to women. So today we're going to be talking about not putting the cart in front of the horse. You've heard that old expression. So we don't want you to put the cart in front of the horse. We're going to talk about something today that is often, one of the first things on somebody's mind, yet maybe they don't even find out about it until further down the road. So we're just going to jump right in. We're going to talk about money. We're going to talk about how much does a deadgum divorce cost? How much money do I need? And then we can sort through some of the other topics as we go through these series. But let's talk about money today.
Okay.
So I think divorce is expensive, right?
Absolutely. It's not a cheap thing.
Not a cheap thing. And my first divorce, it was like you call it, a starter marriage. And we barely had 2 nickels to rub together when we were divorcing. And so we did something very foolish. We shared an attorney. Luckily, it didn't hurt us too badly because we didn't have much to fight over. Second divorce, certainly much more complicated, a lot of discovery, and a very pricey divorce for both of us. So the average divorce in 2020, and I'm thinking these numbers are really prior to COVID hitting us full force, but it could be upwards or, $30,000 easily, right, Allison?
Yeah, the average divorce, if it's non-contested, so this means you know what you're doing, you both want to get divorced, you have some semblance of an idea of what you want, and you're in agreement, is on average $15,000. Whereas if that divorce is contested and you have to go to court, something beyond mediation, they say the national average is $30,000. So one of the things to think about is, we both had that starter marriage. While they felt really, really expensive at the time, because we didn't have much to divide, they weren't all that prohibitive dollar-wise. Whereas the more assets, the longer you've been together, the more children, the properties, the contentiousness of your divorce, that price can go up and up. And that $30,000 number for some people doesn't even cover just one side of that divorce. So you have to be realistic with what you're looking at.
Right. And I think that also lends itself, just when you're looking at the dollars and cents, to finding some common ground and being able to negotiate at the kitchen table before you step into the attorney office, and be able to find some of that, common ground, and then hopefully go through a mediation, as opposed to, putting on the boxing gloves, going to court, dragging it out, and spending your money.
And, I look at it this way. There's two ways to approach your divorce. If this is the path that you have to take and there's no other option, it can either be a shotgun blast. And if you know anything about shotguns, there's a million tiny little particles that when it shoots out, they just go out into the world. And they create a big pattern. Okay. And they hit a lot of places. And if you're not prepared and you don't know the sequential order of things to come, and you don't have a feel for what you're supposed to do, they're supposed to do, and your attorneys are supposed to do, you end up with this shotgun. Now, it will end eventually, but when it's over, everything will be splattered all over the place. Or
Including
there's
your
the
money.
rifle point. Yes. Or you can view this as a rifle point destination. And I know one of the hardest things for us to do is to sit down with our spouse, whether they've said they're filing or we said we're filing, and talk about it. And come to that agreement that it is our money. And the more of it that goes to the lawyers, the less that comes to us. So how can we work together to create that rifle shot, that it comes out of the barrel, it aims at the target, and it lands hopefully somewhere near that bullseye that we can celebrate. And I know we don't celebrate divorce, but it means that when it's over, we haven't torn everything in our path up in the process. And so it's about knowing that process.
I think that's something that's so valuable and very rarely ever talked about, is how do we go through this, including this aspect, the money part of it, the paying for it part of it. How do we go through it and get to the end where we haven't destroyed everything, that we actually get to an end goal that we can both walk away from and say, we did a pretty good job of divorcing.
And I will tell you that working with my clients, that the hardest thing for them, as well as for me when I went through both divorces, was once it was in my mind or my heart what was going to happen, being able to just sit down and talk about it. Because the fear of what will he say, how will he react, what will happen, was actually bigger than the reality. Mm-hmm. And so I lost that opportunity to sit down and lay it all out on the table, hear what he wanted, lay out what I wanted, and see if we could agree that it made no sense to waste money on lawyers. And I don't mean lawyers are a waste of money, but on superfluous excess, using the lawyers to have our battles for us.
Right.
And create something that was streamlined.
And one thing that I would also suggest to people is that if you're looking for a cheaper version and you just want to get a Google divorce or DIY divorce, don't. It will cost you more money in the long run, because inevitably there will be something that has to be changed, modified. And then because of your experience with the Google lawyer or the DIY, experience, you'll know that, okay, I can't fix this myself. I actually need an attorney to fix this. And you'll go get a local attorney that's been recommended to you by a friend or something. And then you're going to have to pay to get it done correctly. So, as painful as it is to write big checks, it's a check that you want to do it the right way. You want to make sure that you're being represented and you want to make sure that you're getting the right kind of representation, and you have to pay for that.
And right now we have half of the women listening, gulping. Their guts are all tied up in knots, going, but where do I find that money? Where does that money come from? And that is the scary part of all of this, is deciding, yes, it's going to cost money. So on average, $15,000 if you can work together, $30,000 could be reasonable depending on what you've got going on, or it could be more. Where do we get that money? And by laying that on the table up front and knowing what you're up against and having that conversation, and we're about to tell you where some of those monies can come from. So if you're working together, there are places that you can go to get the money. If you're not working together, there are places that you can go to find that money to get your divorce taken care of. So that these are things you can work on in the right order to have your ducks in a row before you get the cart before the horse.
Right.
So let's talk about sources for assets to file that divorce.
Certainly. Well, if you're employed, or if you were maybe before kids, and you had a 401k, most times you can pull your money from your 401k plan to pay for your divorce. Now, if you don't have one and he has one, this is where that conversation becomes really important, of like, how do we do this? And especially if you've been married for, a long time, even though that 401k is his and it's based off of his earnings, it's still marital property. So, hopefully he would join you in this conversation of making it available so that you guys can, what's the word I want to use, so that you can, move forward with this divorce in the least painful way possible. Another way, of course, is you can do a home equity loan. Now, in the state of Texas, both parties they don't have to be on the loan, but they have to be aware of the loan. So no lender can go behind somebody's back. There's no little secret door. So if you were to do a home equity loan on the house, even if it's in the other person's name, because they make the money, they can qualify and you don't, perhaps, you still have to sign. So there's no way he can go get money out of the house without you knowing about it. So you would want to be sharing in that equally to go towards paying for your attorney fees. So I know, Allison, you have some other thoughts on other areas people can get some money.
Yeah, and there's the reality is if you have that 401k, you don't have to say anything to anybody. It's yours. You've got an idea of how much money you need. You could say, okay, I can stop there. Does it make sense to go in and what we hate to see is somebody go in and take the family savings and just rip it out from under the other one. Because once you've done that, if there is a family savings and you don't discuss how it's going to be handled, you've started World War III. The person that goes in and takes money that is sitting in a bank account without telling the other one and depletes that account, they then have the high moral ground because that wasn't done together or equitably or amicably. Sometimes it's what we have to do. I get that. And that's a choice you have to make. But there are workarounds to this. If for any reason, let's say you don't have that joint savings account that would take care of this divorce, or you can't get to it, or you don't want to get to it. You don't want to be the person to do that. And we are going to talk about how to protect yourself financially in a later conversation. The things that you should try and take care of long before you ever file. But right now we're just talking about the biggest fear, how am I going to pay for this? So if you can't borrow from your home equity or your 401k, again, can you ask for help? Do you have a family member that you can go to and borrow your retainer? The one thing to understand is when you hire your attorney, it's not like other things where you pay for it as the services are rendered. Your attorney is going to calculate what they think your part of the divorce is going to cost, and they're going to ask you for what's called a retainer, which is a large percentage of that up front. And then as your case goes on, they'll draw from your retainer funds to pay for their expenses. So what we're concerned with right now is the retainer, getting that attorney hired. Okay. And that can be anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000, depending on how complicated all of this looks to be to the attorney. And so if you've got that family member that you can borrow from, once you know how much your retainer is going to be, or at least have someone that you can talk to about it and be prepared. And it doesn't mean you can't pay them back if there's money in the equity in the home or money in 401k or in the bank accounts when the divorce is final, to pay them back. And you'll find that if you're that miserable in your marriage or that unhappy, or they're that unhappy that they left, chances are your family knows what's going on and they're going to want to be there to help you if they can.
Absolutely.
So what other? Mm-hmm.
I think, the other thing too, to be mindful of as you're spending these big bucks, is that every time you talk to your attorney, every time you send them an email, every time you got to ask a question, you're paying for that. You're paying for your attorney, not by the hour, but by the minute, and actually by the micro minute. They may have it broken down into 15 and 30 seconds. It varies from attorney to attorney, but just be aware. So have your ducks in a row, have your paperwork in order, have your game plan in order, have anything that you and your soon to be ex have discussed, have it all in a nice little tidy package, which we're going to talk about in our next conversation, but have everything together so that you minimize the expense of the attorney as much as you possibly can.
And the other thing is, look at that retainer as that upfront cost. The old saying, first impressions. Mm-hmm. They are very important here. Even though you are hiring the attorney, it is your attorney that establishes how much that retainer is going to be. And it's really important that you are prepared when you go in to speak with that attorney to be what I like to create, and it's my phrase, is a credible witness. You want your attorney to see you as a credible witness. So it means being prepared when you meet with your attorney. As Elizabeth said, have a good understanding of what's out there. Be under control. If you walk into the attorney's office and burst into tears, those are going to be the most expensive tears you've ever cried, because that will automatically hit to the attorney, oops, this is going to be tough. I need to have a higher retainer. So go in with a list of questions, which we'll have a call and we'll go through with you. Have the documentation, again, another session, and we're going to go through that with you, which you should have. Have yourself prepared emotionally to interview, because you are hiring the attorney and it is up to you to interview and pick the right attorney to help you. So you feel that you are controlling the process. I don't want to use the word control, but you are in charge of the process as opposed to being a victim of the legal process.
Right. Be proactive instead of reactive.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the hardest things. Women get ready for this, and the thing that stifles them is, I have to hire an attorney. Now what? These are all the things that will prepare you when that day comes to be able to do it, knowing what you're doing, knowing you're doing it in the right way, knowing that you can represent yourself adequately, which will save you a lot of money in the long run, and hopefully a lot of anguish, emotional despair, and time in this process. Now, speaking of time, how long does a divorce take in the state of Texas?
Well, it depends on if you drag it out or not, but if you don't drag it out, we're talking about 60 days, from the time you file everything. So, but, there's been many that have been known to last a year or 2 years, or I would imagine there's something even worse out there than that.
Yeah, your dog doesn't even like that.
Dog doesn't like that.
Yeah, in Texas, your divorce cannot be final for at least 60 days after the petition. And unfortunately, post-COVID, that isn't going to happen. I know my first divorce, my start of marriage, yes, I got it in 60 days afterwards, and it was all fine. That, unless everything is non-contested, filed, and just flies through the court, isn't going to happen. Don't
Right.
even dream about that. Because post-COVID world, you're looking at, and according to the sources we saw online, 6 months to a year was the average length of time for divorce pre-COVID. And with the delays in the courts and the backlogs that the judges have, and in some counties, the judges hear everything from criminal cases to family law. So hopefully, if you're in a county where it's separated and they have family law judges, you're better off. But it can take longer, and that's time that you cannot control, nor can your attorneys. So it
Exactly.
can take a little bit longer.
So in our next episode or next conversation, we're going to be talking about, we're going to start getting into some of the nitty gritty, I guess you might say, and get into the documents that you want to gather now, as opposed to later. And actually, these are things that you should have a copy of anyway, but you definitely want to make sure you have them in plenty of time before you meet with an attorney. So we're going to cover that in our next conversation. So until then, Allison, this has been wonderful.
Thank you, Elizabeth. You're always a wealth of interesting and good, important knowledge.
Yes, it is.